Tales of Destiny 2 is an RPG that revolves around two worlds known as Celestial and Inferior. Upon learning that the worlds are slowly drifting into each other, a young girl named Meredy is sent to warn them of the impending catastrophe. Upon crashing into the world, she runs into Reed, who serves as the game's main protagonist, where they both decide to set out on a journey to save both of the worlds at any cost. As with most RPGs, they are made up of many elements that manage to bring life to the world in which they are set, and this is where Tales of Destiny 2 excels. The amount of NPCs and locations you'll be running into manage to add a real weight to each environment and make the events that unfold all the more believable, thanks to the lovable cast of characters at the centre of it all. Now, very much like other games in the series, the combat system plays out on a 2D plane, with the player having a wide selection of options at their fingertips, the main one being a simple combo attack that soon opens up to far more devastating abilities and even summons that have the potential to turn the tides of a fight in the blink of an eye. If you're looking to add an enjoyable and deep RPG to your collection, then Tales of Destiny 2 is well worth picking up. Valkyrie Profile manages to mix platforming, puzzle and RPG elements all into one truly unforgettable experience. It sees players taking up the role of Lenneth, whose job it is to essentially choose fallen heroes and deliver them to heaven. It all ties heavily into Norse mythology and centers around a war of the gods known as Ragnarok. As I mentioned, several genres play a key role in the adventure. Traversing the environment primarily takes place from a side-scrolling perspective and involves overcoming several puzzles in order to progress. But what steals the show is the intricate and challenging combat system that manages to add an extra layer of strategy than most other RPGs. It's all centered around an energy bar that slowly rises the more you attack, with each party member being assigned to one of the face buttons on the controller. Once the bar at the bottom hits 100, you have the ability to unleash a variety of finishing attacks and chain several together, which soon becomes a real joy to pull off. The amount of experimentation that the gameplay promotes lets Valkyrie Profile shine, making it a game that well and truly deserves a spot in any RPG fan's collection. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is based off the popular manga series of the same name, and is primarily a fighting game, and an excellent one at that. Characters play very similar to other Capcom games, in that they have an array of punches and kicks, special moves and finite super abilities that all need to be charged up through fighting in order to unleash. But what really steals the show is the incredible story mode that is included. It manages to stay faithful to the events of the manga, and even rewards players with extra points for executing fights the same way they appeared in the source material. But JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is not just strictly a fighting game. Throughout the main mode, there are several minigames to advance the story, such as simple interactive cutscenes, which sees you pushing buttons much like Shenmue's QuickTime events, and there are also several unique minigames with their own set of rules. Every one of them is delightful and engrossing as the last, and they keep shoving the story forward while providing entertainment in some of the most creative ways imaginable. This amount of diversity in its gameplay is something not often found within other fighting games, and it really helps the experience stand out. So if you're a fan of the genre and are willing to drop the serious amount of cash on it, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has to be one of the best of its kind on the system, and in no way will disappoint. Suikoden 2 shares much in common with the previous entry in the series, but manages to introduce various new mechanics and ideas that help it stand on its own. The narrative follows a group of childhood friends who find themselves plunged into the middle of a war brought on by a prince of the kingdom known as Luca. After two of the friends disappear, the hero takes it upon himself to make a stand against the tyranny of the prince, and hopefully to reunite with his lost companions. Now, what makes the experience unique is the inclusion of several types of combat. There are three in total, which range from regular encounters, duel, and finally massive battles. The regular battles see up to 6 characters taking on enemies, with a whole range of abilities at the player's disposal. The duel encounters take on a sort of rock paper scissors approach, whilst the massive battles take place upon a grid and share much in common with the likes of the Fire Emblem series. Having all of these separate styles of play present within one game, and each of them being as well thought out as the last, is an incredible achievement and really helps propel the experience into something truly unforgettable. Klonoa games have to be some of the most underrated platformers to date, and its first outing on the PS1 is no exception. It all begins with receiving a premonition through a dream, which sparks the adventure off. The ensuing journey leads him across the various themed kingdoms of Phantom Isle, and like all good platformers before it, these different kingdoms are made up of various locales, such as jungles, caves and skybound boards that make each of them a real joy to traverse. Now the level design is absolutely impeccable. You don't simply travel from left to right, and are constantly thrown a whole range of puzzles that makes getting from point A to B a lot more involved. Klonoa himself doesn't really possess that many abilities, but what is there is used extremely well. Of course he can jump, he can also hang in the air for a second or so, and it will often make the difference between making a jump successfully or falling to your immediate doom. On the offensive front you possess something known as a wind bullet, which essentially inflates enemies and renders them completely harmless. By grabbing them afterwards and jumping in the air, it's possible to fire the enemy downwards, which creates a sort of double jump. It's a good idea to take advantage of this mechanic, and it really comes into play when trying to reach some of the higher platforms in the levels. It's a pretty unique system and lends Klonoa an identity that it can call its own. Although it's not the best platformer on the system by any means, it's still one that deserves a look. Tale Concerto is an absolutely charming adventure from start to finish. It all takes place in a world known as Prairie that is primarily made up of dogs and cats. It manages to portray a surprisingly intricate narrative that propels the adventure forward in a truly captivating way. As the player, you take up the role of Waffle, a sort of police dog who helms a gigantic mech that provides him many functions within the world. It can fire bubbles to trap kittens and attack enemies, it can jump and flap its hands to float in midair, and can even be decked out with a jetpack to soar through the skies of the kingdom. Initially it'll take some time to get used to the control setup, as it can be quite unintuitive at first, but once you've spent some time with the game it all soon becomes second nature. It all primarily plays out like an RPG, with various NPCs occupying the world that can all be spoken to and provide clues on where to go next. But when it comes to the main chunk of the adventure, it's largely an action platformer. It sees you capturing kittens, jumping gaps, riding minecarts and fighting big mechs that all offer their own distinct type of challenge. But if there is one main flaw with the game, it has to be its length, as it can be completed in about 6 hours. But thanks to the inclusion of various difficulty settings, this time can be expanded upon, as well as the level of opposition you'll be facing throughout the adventure. If it passed you by when it first released, it is well worth picking up or emulating it. As many will know, I'm a huge fan of the Persona series. Revelations on the PS1 was the first entry in the popular SMT spin-off, and introduced many aspects that would go on to resonate right into the present day with Persona 5. What truly steals the show is the narrative. It's all set in the modern day and follows a group of high school students as they dabble with an occult game known as Persona. This game brings forth spirits who whisk away some of our heroes to an alternate world, and once they arrive they are bestowed with great powers and are tasked with getting to the bottom of the strange events that surround their town. Now gameplay is where Persona really shines, and it's all presented in two main styles, one being that of an exploration game that sees you visiting various locations of interest throughout the town, with the second being the highly intricate battling system that is all turn-based in nature. It all revolves around the use of personas, which can be summoned and called upon to help you out during battle. Each of them possess differing abilities and uses throughout each encounter, and thanks to something known as the fusion system, they can all be fused together to create even more powerful allies. If you're fond of obscure and unique RPGs, Persona is well worth buying or even emulating for those who may not want to lay down so much cash. It's a great change from the normal RPG fare and requires a real level of thinking to play that is bound to resonate with many players. The Misadventures of Tron is essentially a spin-off to the popular Mega Man franchise. The player becomes the character of Tron, with the main objective of the experience being that to essentially gather a ton of money. At her side are her trusty server bots, as well as her mech suit, which levels the playing field with the various enemies you'll be encountering. Now the game is split up into a series of missions, all the while occupying a ship which acts as your main base. There is so many activities to take part in on the ship, let alone the generous amount of missions that you embark upon. There are several different rooms, each with their own purpose, such as a gym you can use to beef up your server bot's abilities for missions, as well as a torture room for server bots who are being lazy. Each of these rooms provide neat little minigames that tie into their theme, and provide some of the more hilarious moments to be found throughout the game. One of the most important rooms on the ship has to be the R&D room. Here you can develop new gear for your suit like armor, weapon attachments, and even energy tanks, which all alter your chances of successfully completing missions. Even though it's pricey, in my opinion it is well worth it, and if you're not ready to drop that amount of cash on one game, there's always the option of emulation. Clock Tower 2 has to be one of, if not the most strangest and uniquest games I've ever played. It sees you taking up the part of a young lady known as Alyssa, who is sent to live with her uncle. It's not long before the events take a rather sinister turn and result in her alternate personalities and dark secrets coming to the surface. Now the whole adventure plays out in a point-and-click fashion, which is bound to have the potential to turn some players away. Even the battle system is presented in the same manner, and severely dampens the impact of each encounter. It would have been nice if they managed to switch to, say, a Parasite Eve type of battle system. Hell, I wouldn't even have minded a turn-based RPG system, but unfortunately you get stuck with what is on offer, and to be honest, it's not great at all. In my opinion, Clock Tower 2 isn't one of the best horror games on the system, not even a good game on the system, but thanks to its scarcity on the market, it has quickly become one of the most rarest and most expensive games to find. So if you're a collector, you'll probably want this to check it off your list, but if you're just a player looking for something new, Clock Tower 2 is definitely one to avoid. Siphon Filter 3 sees players once again taking on the role of Gabe Logan, the crackshot spy from the previous games who is thrust into a new adventure after having to come to terms with his actions in the past. A new set of targets reveal themselves, and it's up to the player and his allies to take them down and to bring them to justice. Now, one of the finest aspects of the game has to be the sheer amount of locations you'll be visiting. From the scorching deserts to the dense jungle and heavy guarded facilities, there is a lot of variety which mixes up the gameplay in a great way. Much like the previous entries, you have a ton of weapons and special items at your disposal. From standard pistols to non-lethal options such as a trusty stun gun, there's a real sense of freedom that permeates throughout the entire game, as it allows you to approach each target in a way that suits your style of play. May that be guns blazing or the more concerted stealthy approach, making your way through each mission is an absolute blast. Now you're probably wondering why Siphon Filter of all games is one of the most expensive titles on the PS1. The 911 edition was initially produced with a different cover when compared to the one that eventually released, and due to the tragedy of that date, Sony felt it best to alter certain aspects of the artwork that they deemed offensive. But some copies of the original do exist, and they're out there in the wild, even though it was never commercially released. Well, that does it for today's video. Don't forget to hit subscribe and follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date on any future videos. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I will catch you next time.